All right, Dave, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, so a little preamble to the interview. We were having the whole beard conversation, and yours is
Yep.
looking on point, my man. It's looking good.
Yeah. Thank you. I
Uh,
appreciate
is
that.
this
Like I
is
said, I've been working really hard
You've
on it.
been
So
traded hard for it, haven't you?
yeah. Yeah.
Is this the summer look? Is it going to carry into winter, or what's the plan here? What's going to happen?
That's a good question. I did kind of choose a weird time of the year to start growing it out. I like started in spring. I
Sure.
think this will, until I get tired of it, it might be a year-long endeavor. We'll
You,
find out.
you never know. I've had the running debates about getting rid of mine, and it seems to stick. So the problem with mine is for those who can see the video, mine all the gray starts to come in. It starts to get bad. But anyhow, we'll move
Yeah.
past beards.
Well, I'm getting there. I'm
Yeah,
getting there quickly.
it happens, man. It does.
Yeah.
It does happen. So we've known
It
each
sure
other a
does.
long time. You used to live in Knoxville, where I am now, and we
Hmm.
met through the startup scene and those activities. And now you're living in Nashville. We'll get to that, but maybe you could share a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are.
Sure. Um, let's see. So I went to school in UT at UT Knoxville.
Yep.
So that's what landed me in Knoxville. I went to school for mechanical engineering. While I was there, somehow became very interested in startups and just entrepreneurship in general. And there's a program there run by Dr. Lee Martin. Anyone who's been through that program will definitely know that name, and a lot of other people will as well. But um, it's called the Engineering Entrepreneurship Program, and it was just a minor, but I really enjoyed it, and I got to meet a bunch of other entrepreneurs in Knoxville who were making it work. Most of whom were engineers, but not all of them, just because that was kind of the coursework. So my let's see, junior or senior year, I think senior year, I realized, all right, I've kind of got a year left on this life support of scholarships and everything else. So if I'm going to start a business, this would be a great time to, try it for the first time. And so I started a company called WillowList
Yep.
that was basically a crowd-funded wedding registry. So I could put a couch on there, and 10 people could pitch in to buy it for me.
Absolutely. Which I remember you doing the pitch. Maybe the first time I saw it was it Volcourt? Maybe.
Yeah,
Did
it
you
was
do
probably a
Volcourt?
Volport.
Yeah.
Did Volport a couple times. Did it until I won one.
You're right.
So
I remember judging it, and I think I may have judged it the year you won it, if I remember. Anyhow, memory
yeah,
slips. I judged enough of those, but I do remember you pitching it
yeah,
the first time, and I thought, yeah, this is a good idea because you have the whole. And I'll let you tell the origin story of it, but you have, in my
yeah,
mind, you had the whole idea of people go out and do a registry, and people individually buy different things, but some are really high ticket dollar items, and there was no real easy way for people to sort of divvy that up. Was that the genesis of the idea, basically?
yeah. That was the genesis, and there were kind of two more factors too, which was um, people are getting married on average later in life. So like 28 to 30 is the average age at which you get married now. And by that time, you have a lot of kitchen utensils. You have a lot of, the typical things that are on registries. But you're maybe like have just bought a home or are about to buy a home after you get married or something like that. So you might have some some higher priced items on your wish list at that point. So that was part of it, and also for the people giving the gift, it's very much like it makes them feel good, right, to give a gift. So they want to be able to choose something like when I'm picking a gift, I want to choose something that I know the other person's going to love and use a lot. And so that's kind of an opportunity to contribute to something like, it might seem silly to contribute to a couch, but if you think about it, like they're going to use that a lot. That's going to be like a
Yep.
centerpiece of their family room. It's a meaningful thing to contribute to as opposed to a spatula or some towels.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally
Yeah.
get it. And so most entrepreneurs that we talk to on the podcast, it comes from the idea typically comes from some sort of pain point they were experiencing. Were you going through a process like this, either engagement or something, or knew someone that led you to the creation of Willow List?
Yeah, so a few of my friends were engaged at the time that I had the idea, and shortly after starting the company, I was engaged.
Okay. All
So
right.
yeah, it definitely came a lot from personal experience.
So going through it, and then so you go through Valcourt. You mentioned you went through a couple of them, which is a takeaway people need to remember. I always like to pause when there's a good takeaway for folks, but
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes those hidden nuggets we move past them. But the point is you kept trying multiple pitch competitions, and I'm sure what that meant is you were able to better refine your message as you went along. And then you mentioned you sort of finally win one in your own
yeah,
words,
yeah,
and get some winnings there. And then what was the next steps after winning one? I mean, where did things go from there?
yeah. That's a great question. So I was fortunate enough to find a technical co-founder to work with. I know that's a big challenge for a lot of people who
Yep.
aren't technical.
And how'd you do that?
It was really chance. It's not a it's not something that you could prescribe to someone else. A partner of in WillowList, there was a business that was a partner, and one of the people in that business met this person named David Furman. I think he still lives in Knoxville.
Okay.
And introduced the two of us. We went and grabbed coffee, and I told him about the idea, and he had kind of an entrepreneurial background too. He'd made several products before, and it just seemed like a good fit. So we kept talking, and within I think a month or so, he was a co-founder.
Yeah, so I get your point. It sounds like sort of a random occurrence, but really, if we broke it down, it's really about networking. So you sort of had this built-in
Yeah,
network through
that's
that
fair.
business partner, and they led you to it. Same way I found Frank Podlaha when we did Go Grab Lunch together. It was just networking, which is a great way to meet a co-founder. And then you mentioned you guys have coffee and you hit it off, and
Mhm.
that's a great pairing to have that business mind and creator, and then someone who can actually do the technical side, the coding of the platform, and
Mhm.
those type of things. I want to save us time to get to what you're doing now. So if we jump ahead a little
Yeah.
bit, so
Yeah. Yeah.
just run us through sort of what happened with WillowList and maybe some of the successes and or struggles along the way. People enjoy hearing those type tidbits. It helps them.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So we had some technical challenges that there wasn't a way to do what we really wanted to do. Basically, we would have to have like an API that allowed us to order from all these different companies, and it
Yeah,
didn't exist, and they weren't going to build it for us. And so we were like, it's kind of risky to just do that manually or do it in some kind of hacky way until maybe we're big enough that they care.
right.
So we were, there was this technical risk that we didn't know was there at the beginning, um, and also a competitor launched, I think 3 months after we started.
Mm-hmm.
That was started by the same guy who started MongoDB, Business Insider, and a few others. So they started with 12 people and $3.25 million as a
Quite a few more
seed fund.
resources.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
their seed round.
yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, we were already kind of not feeling great about it, and then that business that we were a partner with went out of business, and so there is a big question mark as to whether they were going to try to give us some money out of it, but that was going to set a valuation, and we had no way to negotiate what that was going to be. I know I'm
Sure.
speaking really quickly over all of those terms just now,
No,
but
no, it's great. I mean, it's so there's again great place to pause. There's always lessons in there, and one of the things that we always talk about when we work with startups, and I'm sure you do now when you talk to them. I'll tell a quick story if I may.
yeah,
I wrote an entire book about my first startup, and the title is "Lessons from a Failed Startup." And the reason I'm saying that is because I remember um, the idea of not wanting to talk about the failure of what happened. And the truth
yeah,
is, people like Chris Miller would called me afterwards and said, you're calling it a failure. Have you lost your mind? You had members in 45 countries. How's that a failure? So in our
right.
mind, it becomes this failure that we didn't get to where we wanted to go. But I remember you guys did quite well and made it a lot further than a lot of folks do. And
Mhm.
there's lessons in that. And I think that's why we're doing what we do now is the opportunity for folks like you and I to get on here and say, you know, we made a run at it. We made the best run at it that we could, but there was lessons along the way. And I think a great one for folks to hear out of what you just said was sometimes those competitors come in. So it's the whole idea in my mind. You experienced a lot what we did at Go Grab Lunch. Tell me if I'm stealing your words or wrong. But
Go for
the
it.
first mouse is the second mouse that gets the cheese, right? That's a
Right.
little bit crude, but it's true. And you
Hmm.
you were very early and probably the first, if not one of the first, in what you were doing. And there's a cost of education in the marketplace and to yourself. There's no roadmap to follow, and so competitors that come in, and this is one of the things investors ask about. They ask about competition and what are you going to do
Right.
if a big dog comes in with all the resources you don't have and tries to blow you out of the water. That's one of the things you guys dealt with. And if you went back, hindsight's always 2020, there might be some things you would do differently to try and avoid that. But I guess the struggle was at the time there was just no intellectual property that you could really use to keep them back. There was no
Right.
big barrier to entry.
Yeah. So we did pivot a little bit, and there was potential for some uniqueness still. And there's still to this day, there's not a company that I'm aware of doing what we were going to pivot to. And that was kind of catering to smaller, like local boutique shops and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had no one really paying attention to them. But obviously, it's a lot more work to get those companies on board. Um, but really, what ultimately I think is the biggest lesson learned from me from that whole experience is not just that like competitors will enter, because yes, they will, and you can try to pivot and keep some kind of edge. The most important lesson for me was I had a lot of mentors in Knoxville, people who are still mentors, and that I'm still very grateful for. But I got bad advice from some of them. In
Interesting.
hindsight, I think I got bad advice.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you willing to go into any of that, at least at a high
yeah,
level? What was
absolutely.
that advice so that people can hear?
It was that I needed to raise money.
Mm,
That I needed to raise between 150,000 to 500,000. I had people help me with my financial statements and really figure all this stuff out. And people who also gave me lots of really good advice. So I think
sure.
there's a smaller lesson there, which is that you still have to kind of apply your own filter to the information that you're getting from other people, even people that you really trust that are far more experienced than you.
Yeah, so that is a great
Yeah.
takeaway, Dave. Thanks for sharing that. I think people need to hear
Mhm.
that. They need to understand that while there are great mentors and experienced people out there, they're going to share their opinions. You certainly should listen to those things, but it doesn't mean you always have to heed exactly what they're telling you.
Exactly.
I don't want to steal the thunder in the show, but it's similar advice we got to go grab lunch. They kept saying to us, because all of us, the three founders,
Yeah.
were part time. One of the things they kept telling us was, A, you need to raise a bunch of money, and B, you all need to quit your day jobs. And I kept saying, at that time we were in our 30s, I kept saying, late 30s, I kept saying that's a recipe for bankruptcy. I mean, we're all
Yeah.
established in our careers. We've all got good careers with good earnings. It's a recipe for bankruptcy. And they did. A lot of
Hmm.
the mentors kept saying, oh, just quit your day job and make a run at this. So what was it about raising money you didn't think you needed to go down that path? Was it giving up the equity? Was it you didn't think you needed as much as they thought to at least get to an MVP status? What was it?
Right. So, two parts to that. And something that you just said spurred the other one. Um, we didn't need to be raising money. We could have used money, sure, but we hadn't proven enough yet.
Absolutely.
So if we raised money, we had this idea of how we were going to spend it, but we had no guarantee that spending it was going to get X return, right? And instead, so we just kind of had this loose idea of what we were going to do with it, and what we really should have done was not spend any time trying to raise money and just spend all of our time doing that plan for the first time, because it was kind of a regional plan, right? So we were going to do it in Knoxville, see if it worked, and then we were going to do it in other cities.
Mm-hmm.
We should have just done it in Knoxville and done it to the best of our ability and scraped through it with no money.
Yep.
And if that was proven and growing, and we could actually show how we would reproduce that in a different place, um, then it would have been much easier to raise money. And what happened is I spent a lot of time trying to raise money, and that was wasted time because we just weren't ready yet. And
Absolutely.
so my advice to people is don't don't waste your time trying to raise money too early. Like, wait until you have a business that really is ready. It has to be burning and you need gas on the fire. It can't be like smoldering ember, or like you've got a plan for like this awesome fire that you're going to build. Like, that's not good enough.
Yeah,
You,
that's fantastic.
it'll save you a
I
lot of
can't wait
time.
for people to hear that, man. That's such great advice. Probably some of the best advice that we've had on the podcast. So I really appreciate you being open and willing to
Yeah.
share those experiences. Obviously, you learned a lot through that process, and it's probably,
Yep.
I again, I wrote a book called Lessons of a Failed Startup, but at the end of the day, really what it is almost 30 different lessons that have changed the trajectory of other things that I've done in my life. So you decide to wrap up WillowList, I'm guessing, and move on to the
Hmm.
next thing and take those lessons into other endeavors. Why don't you share a little bit about what you're doing now? Now you've moved to Nashville, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Real quick, I'm going to backtrack
No, go
to
for it.
share one more little lesson that I learned, which is that
We need all that
um,
we can get.
if you start out trying to build like a high growth business and it turns out that it's not going to be as big as you thought it was, don't scrap it yet. You might still be able to build a decent side income. It might be a small business, but it could take a small amount of effort to continue to run. And it kind of sounds like, based on our conversation, like WillowList possibly could have gone that way. And I've thought every once in a while, like, I wonder if I could have done that. Go
Yeah.
Grab Lunch might have been the same way. Like maybe you didn't have to quit
Oh,
your
this is
job and
gold,
it would
buddy.
have been a huge success, but like everyone in Knoxville would have used it
They
and
did,
it,
yeah. They're
right? And
still
it,
asking me to bring it back. I got somebody to ask for it last week, and
yeah,
so man, that's gold.
everyone aims for the moon because like that's what we see in on TechCrunch. That's what we see, everywhere. That's what's in like the pitch competitions, and it is totally okay to build a business that just makes some cash for you on the side. That's awesome.
I think we should just stop right there. That's absolute gold, Dave. That is. So it's thank you for bringing us back to it. And why don't we stay there
Yeah.
another minute? I think you're spot on. I think, what happens is we see the sexiness of the startup ecosystem and everybody gets convinced they have to be the next high growth startup that you talked about. And
Mhm.
I've said something similar to folks in the past. So thanks again for bringing us back to it. But what's wrong with
Yeah.
why does it have to be a grand slam? What's wrong with a single or a double? What's wrong with creating a lifestyle business? That's one of the reasons the podcast exists, is to feature folks who are just doing a lifestyle business. They're just doing a side
Hmm.
hustle. Those are okay. They're
Yeah.
income that I've done that myself. I have some multiple income streams, and some of them are side hustles that just produce a little bit of beer money, and some produce
Right.
vacation money, and some produce other
Right.
retirement money and things like that. So
Yeah.
you're so wise to point that out to everybody, and I hope everyone stops and realizes that it doesn't have to be the next Facebook. It's okay to have that next single person job, and let's create jobs one person at a time,
Yeah.
or even. Do you feel like this idea of it allowing it to you to be a lifestyle business or side hustle or whatever you want to phrase it? Do you feel like
Sure.
there's also a benefit beyond the revenue? Do you feel like that just the skill sets that you learn in trying to create those things even add value to other things, either corporate jobs or other hustles and things like that? Is that part of the benefit you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another one is just the flexibility that it gives you. I mean, an extra $1,000 a month is a lot of flexibility
Changes
for
people's
most
lives.
people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But yeah, I would definitely agree. I think the lessons that you can learn there can definitely be applicable to a job or a career and help you move ahead in that area or that field, or might even help you get the next job because it's something on your resume that most people just don't have. And that's
absolutely.
interesting. It's like, oh, you actually built a business and are making money. That's great. That's what we do here. So
Yeah, that's what we do. We try and do well, and it's those entrepreneurial skill sets add value to
yeah.
anything. So you're so
Hmm.
right. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought us there.
Yeah, sure, no problem. That's also a fairly good segue
Yeah.
to what I'm doing now. So after WillowList, I had a short stint in Oak Ridge working for a big engineering company. Didn't like it very much. Moved to Nashville to work in product design, which is kind of what I always wanted to do while I went to school. So worked at that company for about a year, and then about a year into it, I left and started the company that I'm running now, which is Fractal, Fractal Hardware. And I started it with two guys that I met at my last job. And so we've been doing that for about a year. I would describe it as more of a lifestyle business because it's an agency, so not huge growth opportunities, but obviously we hope to grow the company. Um, yeah, so it's a totally different kind of startup, but I would still very much so call it a startup.
And you're working with startups and or existing companies of your own for product design and
Yeah.
taking them through
So
that process.
yeah, so what Fractal does is we people, whether it's an individual inventor or a startup company, they have an idea for a product, but they don't know how to get it there, how to get it to a shelf or get it into a customer's hands. So what we do is we take them through idea, we design what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, how it's going to be manufactured, help them find manufacturers and communicate with them because there's a whole language and process to that. And then ultimately help them get to the point that, they're ready to start marketing and selling and trying to get it into stores or set up their e-commerce site or license just their IP or whatever their avenue is. There are a lot of different ways that people can try to make money with the work that we do for them, but we just get them to that point.
And where are most of your clientele coming from? You're just out through networking or web
Yeah, pretty
leads?
much.
Or
It's
okay,
it's just from getting out there and networking for the most part. We do get some web leads. We get a lot of referrals, especially referrals from previous clients. I think we're up to 11 reviews on Google now, um, averaging 4.9 stars. So
that's
gotta
really
give
good.
ourselves a pat on the back for that because I'm proud of that. So yeah, most of it comes from referral or just networking.
Yep. And so the
Yeah.
three of you and the plans are to grow the company. Is there been any discussions about next steps beyond that? Is it just something the three of you want to run, or do you plan on taking on employees over time if you grow enough? I mean, where does all that
Yeah.
potential growth take you?
Yeah, yeah. So we definitely hope to grow to hire more people because with hiring more people, one, we're just adding more perspectives than the three of us have. And I think that's really important when you're designing products for for niches that are neither one of the three of us, right? That happens a lot. And so we have to do some extra research to figure out what that looks like. So you get extra perspectives, you get expertise that you didn't have before. So we definitely plan to hire because we want to be able to do a better job on projects, and we want to be able to do a broader range of projects. Um, Outside of that, we have fun every once in a while, kind of daydreaming about what Fractal could be. Is it
Sure.
always just going to be this agency? We've toyed with the idea of maybe one day doing somewhat of like a hardware accelerator, where we are just giving a little bit of our time to someone who's in our office that we don't even have yet. That they're using our machines and equipment, and they can ask us a question if they get stuck on something. We've thought about trying our own internal product and going through the process actually for ourselves because we've gone through it with other people, but we've never done it like, you know, just for ourselves. So we've thought about doing that. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that we might do in the future, but for right now, probably for the next year or so, the plan is to just keep doing what we're doing and keep making people really happy.
Just dialing in how you're doing it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
getting really good at what we're doing now.
yeah, which goes back to your lesson, really, if you think about it from WillowList. It was just getting
Yeah,
really good at that one solution in that one territory and then taking it to the next. So there's your
yeah,
lessons from your previous paying off. So
yeah,
just
definitely.
curious your thoughts on talk a little bit about the South and the startups. You know, you moved to Nashville. Nashville's kind of booming right now when it comes to startup. I was telling you prior to
It
recording that
is.
there's lots of news coming out of national publications about things going on in the South. St. Louis and some other cities have been named great
Hmm.
places as startup hubs and things like that. How have you found the startup scene in Nashville and
Yeah.
thoughts on it?
That's funny. I had a good friend of mine was just in town this weekend from California. Him and his girlfriend are both from here, and they said that whenever they tell people they live in Orange County, and they said whenever they tell people that they're from Nashville, they're like, "Oh, that's so cool! You're from Nashville," and they're like, "What do you mean that's so cool? Like I'm just
Just
from
Nashville.
Nashville." Like, because they moved like 5 or 6 years ago, and it like wasn't that cool, and it's changed so much.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's some perspective. Um, but yeah, so the number of startups that I am impressed with has like I think probably doubled each year for the past 2 years. Get to meet a lot of these people, especially the people that are that have hardware. Whether we're helping them or not, we just like to meet them and see what they're doing and
absolutely.
learn from them, and hopefully they learn something from us. And yeah, it's amazing. There are a couple companies in Nashville and Chattanooga, um, and I think I know of at least one in Knoxville that are all just incredibly impressive. And of course, there are many, many more that are well on their way. So yeah, I think it's a good place. I think raising money is still the biggest hurdle, the biggest challenge that
For the ones that
everyone
need it.
cites.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my advice to them is that if you're in the 1% that actually need it and are having a hard time, you actually are in a hard place right now. That actually is a challenge, and people probably are trying to get you to move to them in order to give you money. But for the vast majority of people, maybe you just don't need to raise money yet.
It's good advice. It kind of goes back to my interview with Sonia from Homey, and we talked about the same sort of things going on, and that happens in East Tennessee too. I mean, it's just it's the access to capital is certainly changing, but it is taking time to get there, and
Still
what
tough. Yeah.
it is still tough. And what I think we're finding too is the different cities, Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville, all of them
Yep.
sort of have their appetite for certain types of industries, and they're somewhat stuck on those. So Memphis is doing a ton of health, and and
Yep.
everybody. I think it goes back to your earlier comment, which
True.
is a lot of these places that have the excuse me, that have the
Hmm.
capital are just looking for those high growth, and it's because they have to justify the return, and they're not putting the money into maybe the doubles or the triples that could exist, and
Yeah.
so we're just not talking about the companies that are flying under the radar and things like that.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's very true.
very cool. Well, I think it's a good place to wrap it up. I really appreciate the
Yeah.
lessons. I can't wait to put this information out to everybody, and I hope they pay attention to some of those takeaways that you shared along the way. If someone wanted to connect with you about what you do at Fractal, where would they find you?
Yeah, you can find the company at fractalhardware.com. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. If you have a question, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today. It's been really great talking to you again.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Take care.